Welcome to Community in Christ's Wednesday Night Live. This is our third talk on Bruchmann's book, Humankind, A Hopeful History. This talk is based upon the second chapter, which is titled, The Real Lord of the Flies. So tonight I'm going to engage with Bruchmann's comparison of the fictional Lord of the Flies with the historical event of the Tonga Runaways. This video has been compiled after our Zoom meeting, and I'm going to incorporate some of the most pertinent remarks during the discussion. I also did some extra research on Golding and Bruchmann and supplied the comparison in the conclusion. I hope you are going to enjoy it. Who better to write about boys behaving badly than the Nobel laureate Sir William Golding? Born in 1911, he died in 1993 at the age of 81. Having graduated from Oxford in English literature, Golding was a schoolmaster from 1938 to 1961, a period of 23 years. During the war, he served in the British Navy from 1940 to 1945. He therefore had good experience of the behavior of boys and men in groups. When he died, his wife and he had been married for 54 years. But before his death, he addressed private memoirs to her. It is confessional and revealing in nature, and now it is in the public domain. He describes how, while teaching at a boys' school, Bishop Wordsworth's in Salisbury, he divided his pupils into two gangs. One had to attack a prehistoric camp, while the other group had to defend it. He writes that the behavior of the boys caused his eyes to come out like organ stops. And during this exercise, the characters of Simon, Rolf, Piggy, and the others active in The Lord of the Flies may have been born. The book was published in 1954, and his debut novel reveals a pessimistic view of human nature. It was remarked during the discussion that the fact that role-playing was involved may have led the boys to behave how they imagined a group of fictional prehistoric personalities may have behaved. Their behavior is not supposed to be realistic or revealing of human nature, only of how they viewed human nature. Gabriel Garcia Marquez famously said, "All human beings have three lives: public, private, and secret." Most of us don't feel comfortable to reveal our shameful secret part. Golding did this with a painful honesty. The memoirs portray how he tried to drown his demons in alcohol. Disturbingly, he describes his attempted rape of a 15-year-old girl when he was 18 and on his first holiday from Oxford. It involved a Marlborough girl named Dora who had taken piano lessons with Golding. In his memoirs, he rationalizes his behavior by describing the girl as depraved by nature and at 14 already sexy as an ape. She fought him off and ran away as he was shouting, "I'm not going to hurt you." 2 years later, the two met up again in a field and had sex. Golding describes the girl uttering crude remarks during the episode. He felt he had to be honest to his wife about the monstrous side of his character. Bruchmann states that Golding also beat his children. His remark is based upon Golding's own account of a pillow fight with his 4-year-old son, where he describes how he had enjoyed hitting the boy and stopped when my son was on the verge of tears. Golding's daughter later said that their father never beat or smacked them. He struggles with the dark side of his own personality his experience of war, and his observation of his pupils gave him a masterful ability to portray the murky depths of humankind. This is evident in Lord of the Flies. A British plane goes down on a deserted island somewhere in the Pacific during the Second World War. Only a group of about 20 British schoolboys survive. It is a paradise of food, water, and beaches. Any boy's dream. Better still, there were no grown-ups. On their very first day, the boys elect leader Rolf. He devises a 3-point strategy. 1. Have fun. 2. Survive. 3. Make smoke signals for passing ships. The having fun part turns out to be successful. However, the boys neglect to keep the fire going. Before long, they paint their faces, cast off their clothes, and develop the overpowering urges to pinch, to kick, to bite, and to kill. Piggy, who was the voice of rationality, trying to keep things orderly, was murdered. When they are finally rescued, the island is a smouldering wasteland. 3 of the children are dead. The British naval officer rescuing them exclaims, "I should have thought that a pack of British boys would have been able to put up a better show than that." Rolf bursts into tears. He wept for the end of innocence and for the darkness of man's heart. The novel has been translated into more than 30 languages, is prescribed in schools as part of the English curriculum, and was made into a film. Golding confessed, "I have always understood the Nazis because I am of that sort by nature." The Lord of the Flies embodies his dark view of human nature. Bruchmann says he felt disillusioned when he had first read the book as a teenager, but did not question Golding's outlook. However, when he gained more knowledge of Golding's personality, his alcoholism, and his suppressed violent traits, he started to question his insight into human nature. Bruchmann's father was a Protestant minister and his mother a teacher of children with special needs. I am not sure whether this background caused him to unfairly judge Golding, who had been so brutally honest about the dark side of his psyche. In any case, Rutger just could not bring himself to believe that boys would behave like those in The Lord of the Flies. He wrote an article in which he compared modern scientific insights with the behavior of the boys in the novel. It was reviewed with skepticism, as the examples he used concerned children at home, at school, or at a summer camp. He decided to do some more research to try and find a real event where boys were stranded on an island. In a newspaper archive of the Australian newspaper The Age of the 6th October 1966, he discovered an article. It told the story of 6 boys who had been found 3 weeks earlier on an islet south of Tonga. Tonga is a group of islands in the Pacific Ocean. They had been stranded on the island of Ata for more than a year. Peter Warner, an Australian sea captain, had rescued them. In a 2016 local newspaper from Mackay in Australia, he found a small article on a 50-year reunion between the then 83-year-old Warner and the 67-year-old Mano Totau, one of the 6 boys rescued. Rudka and his wife visited Peter Warner and he told them the whole story. Being the son of Arthur Warner, one of the richest men in Australia in the 1930s, he was groomed to take over his father's business. He rebelled and ran away at the age of 17. Returning home 5 years later, he proudly presented his father with a Swedish captain's certificate. His father encouraged him to study accounting, and he started working for him. Whenever he could, he sailed and built up a fishing fleet in Tasmania. In the winter of 1966, he sailed to Tonga, and on his way home decided to make a detour. This was when by chance he came upon the island of Ata. It had been uninhabited since 1863, when the natives were captured as slaves. He saw some burnt patches on the green cliffs. On closer investigation, he discovered 6 boys half naked, frantically calling on him for help. The boys reckoned they had been marooned on the island for 15 months. The day of their rescue was the 11th of September 1966. Once on board, they told him they had been enrolled at the strict Catholic boarding school of St. Andrews in Nuku'alofa, the capital of Tonga. Hating the dormitory food, they decided to loan a boat from one of the locals. They actually stole it. Bruchmann meticulously researched the detail by later interviewing the 6 men: Sione, Stephen, Kolo, David, Luke, and Mano. When they ran away, the oldest was 16, the youngest 13. Their plan was to sail to Fiji, some 800 kilometers away, and if they could, proceed all the way to New Zealand. 2 sacks of bananas, a few coconuts, and a small gas burner were the only supplies they took with them. Only the 13-year-old had any knowledge of sailing a boat. That night, a wind came up. It destroyed the sails and the rudder. Adrift for 8 days, they survived by catching rainwater in hollowed-out coconut shells and sharing it equally between them. Finally, they landed on the island of Ata. Due to a scarcity of rain during the summer and a harsh environment, it is to this day regarded as uninhabitable. The boys discovered some chickens descended from those left behind 100 years earlier, as well as bananas and wild taro. Initially, they survived on fish, coconuts, tame birds, and eggs. At the time of their rescue, they had set up a garden, stored rainwater in hollowed-out tree trunks, constructed a gymnasium with primitive weights, as well as a badminton court. Furthermore, they had chicken pens and a permanent fire. Their only tool was an old knife blade. In contrast with the Lord of the Flies, their fire was maintained meticulously for over a year. Having experimented for many days, Stephen had managed to start a fire by rubbing dry sticks together. In my own opinion, they continued with the disciplines taught at school. Each day was begun with a song and a prayer. Some of the participants in the discussion also mentioned that the boys' culture may have played a part in the way they cooperated to survive. It was felt that Bruchmann did not adequately take this into account. Kolo made a makeshift guitar from a piece of driftwood, half a coconut shell, and 6 steel wires from the boat. Peter Warner still keeps this as a memento. They made music on it to lift their spirits. One day, Stephen fell off a cliff and broke his leg. They set his leg with sticks and leaves, cared for him, and it healed perfectly. The boys drew up a strict roster, working in teams of 2. 2 in the garden, 2 in the kitchen, and 2 on guard duty. Whenever there was a quarrel, they imposed a time out until the temperaments cooled down. Then they shook hands, said they were sorry, and made up. In the meantime, in Nuku Alofa, they were declared dead and funeral services were held. After Peter Warner brought them back, they were arrested and thrown in jail for the theft of the boat. Peter paid the aggrieved owner £150 and then they were released. Some documentaries were made but never aired. Peter employed the boys in his fishing fleet. Later, Stephen became an engineer. At the end of the interview, Peter handed Bruchmann his memoirs. It began with the sentence, "Life has taught me a great deal, including the lesson that you should always look for what is good and positive in people." Examined by a doctor, he found them to be in excellent health with muscled physiques. Their tale of loyalty and friendship has only become widely known now. William Golding's novel was praised for its brave depiction of human nature. He won the Nobel Prize for his contribution to the art of realistic narrative. Many historians of television regard him as the father of reality TV, for example, Big Brother, Temptation Island, and Survivor. The assumption of these shows is that human beings act like animals when on their own. The shows center around lying, cheating, ganging up, and verbal abuse. Each episode presents itself as realistic and true. However, when one starts to investigate what is happening behind the scenes, an incredible amount of fraud comes to light. Producers tell candidates which lies to use, spike them with alcohol, and pitted them against each other. This is how they bring out the worst in people. Research has shown that people who watch these shows are affected negatively. Children think that to get to the top, they have to lie, cheat, and exploit. It feeds their aggressive tendency. The researcher George Gerbner declares that those who narrates the stories of a culture controls human behavior. One participant in the discussion lived in a dormitory in a private school in South Africa. He related how boys developed structures for the group. It was not always humane. There were bullying, violence, authoritarian hierarchies, and rule by fear. The teachers turned a blind eye to it. Another related the structure of initiation rites at university dorms. These are used to establish authoritarian hierarchies, groupthink, and acting as a distinct group hostile to other groupings. These had led to tragedies when some individuals were isolated, picked upon, and even killed during initiation rites going awry. The phenomenon of online bullying was also raised, where in virtual communities, antisocial and uncooperative behavior sometimes thrive. It was felt that Bruchmann's view perhaps was a little bit one-sided. Comparing Golding's novel with the story of the Tonga Runaways, some fascinating insights come to light. Both groups are stranded on an island. It is a paradise for the characters of The Lord of the Flies. It is barely habitable for the Tonga Runaways. In the novel, the first group elect a leader. On Ata, no leader is elected. The group has a flat organizational structure. Golding's boys want to have fun, in contrast with the Tonga Runaways, who only want to survive and stay healthy. Very soon the first group paint their faces and dance around the head of a pig, symbolizing their degradation. The second group opens their day with prayer and song and uses an improvised musical instrument to lift their spirits. In The Lord of the Flies, they failed to keep the fire going. In contrast, the Tonga runaways managed to keep their fire going until the day of their rescue. The boys degrade into fighting, war and murder, splitting up into two opposing groups, according to Golding's story. The boys on the Ata Island have processes in place to manage conflict. They cooperate and share responsibilities in a fair and equal manner. According to Golding, the worst in human nature comes to the surface if there are not adequate controls. The history of the Tonga runaways reveals that the best in human nature comes out when people are struggling to survive. Bruchmann ends the chapter with the remark that we need alternative stories, of which that of the Tonga runaways is one. The discussion group agreed that their story needed to be told, but that it may not represent how children in general would act in similar circumstances. It was felt that religious and cultural backgrounds need to be taken into account, as well as the phenomenon of peer pressure, which may lead to both pro-social and antisocial behavior. So this was it for this week. Thank you, and you are most welcome to join us again next week.